Welcome to Imaginize World, where we hear from forward thinkers, activists, and sci-fi visionaries. Today I'm with Nicholas Omonuk, a climate justice activist. Present in global events, he stands out because his work is based on real-life, grassroots experiences. Let's hear his story. You talk about climate justice, not climate activism, not climate environment or climate change, but climate justice. I think that's very important. What do you understand that to mean?
I think for me, like the reason why I call it climate justice activism is because I don't just focus on only like what happens when we see the weather changes or what happens when we see floodings, but I focus on also the after effects and also focus on issues of access to justice. So for me, climate justice is not just about climate change itself impacting our communities, climate change itself affecting us, but it's also about about the causes of the climate change, about who is causing it and about who is meant to pay, about who is meant to provide justice to communities in the global south, including in Uganda, and of course, linking it to the different perspectives of also like colonialism, of racism, and also connecting it to migration, connecting it to where like movements are, like also seeing that we have a very wide big movement, but then the people, of course, who are being listened to are not people who are coming from the global south, are not people who are coming from communities that are impacted by the climate crisis. And it's also about who is causing the companies themselves and these companies having unfair supply chains and these unfair supply chains affecting people's human rights, where of course there is unfair treatment of people like who are working in these areas where they're mining also resources for a just transition, because climate justice is not just about the climate crisis itself, but it's also about the transition away from fossil fuels, and also this transition is affecting countries in Africa. It's also escalating conflicts. So for me, it's about linking the climate crisis to the politics, to the climate crisis, to the social lives, to the economic crisis, to all the crises, and connecting it as one and seeing these connections, because we cannot address one without addressing the other. Like everything is very interconnected.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that is quite a challenge. I saw that you're a member of a group called MAPA or MAPA, I don't know how you refer to it, the most affected people and areas, and you represented that group at the COP27 with some other young activists. So you've reached the global scene, haven't you?
Yeah,
Congratulations. That's a big deal.
yeah, yeah.
It
Thanks.
is. It's a really big deal to reach that point. And I think then you have an opportunity to make a difference. People will pay more attention to you.
People pay attention, but it's not like really like that much attention. For example, when we go for these COPs, you find that we are going to these COPs with observer badges. We are going to these COPs where, of course, there are also limitations coming in, because at COP 27, when you realize a lot has changed, at COP 27, we were allowed to march around the area to do our campaign. And of course, we put a lot of pressure. And by that time, also, we had a lot of people supporting us during that time. And during this COP, I think we got the loss and damage. We put pressure until the loss and damage was put onto the agenda. But when I look at like now the other COPs that are coming in, like maybe COP 28 and of recent COP 29, the restrictions have become more strict on activists. The COP processes themselves are not really like a very democratic space, I would say, because like a lot of people are restricted to access these negotiation rooms, and sometimes like it's very difficult to even like do campaigns, because for us like climate activists, most of what we do is like to actually campaign for equity, to campaign for fairness, to campaign for inclusion, and to campaign for radical change, which of course is not happening, and to campaign for justice, because we have had these cops for so many years,
Right.
and for us, like it's about us having to share a story and making this change happen, but this is not happening because we are not being allowed to march. We have to register our actions nowadays, which makes it very difficult, and you have to stay in only one location, and everything seems very scripted. I would say it's like everything is where is organized, that all these outcomes that come in, it's like a movie, like they already know like the ending of it.
It's not a democratic system, is it? I read somewhere that they had to reach consensus in the groups. And so if you have one single member of a group, one country that disagrees with something, that will block the whole result of that group.
Yeah, of course, it also depends because it's a consensus, but at the same time, the G7 hold more bargaining power than the G77 and China. So it's not a fair consensus, I would say. And at the same time, it's not a consensus that treats the countries in the global south fairly. So this
Right.
is like most of the times the countries in the global south, party delegation in the global south, demand that what they are demanding for is actually prioritized. Because of recent, like at COP29, it was headed actually by a Uganda was leading the G77 and China, and of course the main focus for Africa itself was adaptation, and this was insisted at COP29. But at the same time, we realized that this was not a priority for the G7. At the same time, the G7 were prioritizing carbon markets, carbon offsets, because they are profiting from it. So we are seeing that also the issue of the climate crisis and climate change is being treated as a thing to make money, to make business. Yet it's a matter of justice. We are trying, like, these are the injustices that we try to also address and share, that this is not a fair process, and it's not really putting in consideration what the global south want.
Let's just take it for granted for a moment that these big global media loving events are not really making a change. What do you think can bring about change? Are there bottom up movements? Are there other things that can bring about change?
I think the change that we want is like the change, like the theory of change itself, like what you talked about, the bottom up approach. Like this is how things have to be addressed actually when we want to address the climate crisis itself. I will give an example of one of the communities in Uganda that we went to, and we tried to bring an eco-friendly stove in the school. And then just a year later, we found that the eco-friendly stove was just the way it was built. So they didn't even use it. So it means we don't have to just bring solutions in communities that are affected like by the climate crisis, but we also need their solutions. We need to hear what solutions they want. We need to hear how they want the solutions to be implemented. The way the system is structured is from the top to the bottom. And most of the times in the global south, you realize that the resources, the climate finance itself does not reach the people who actually need the climate finance. There were many reports with Oxfam and other NGOs indicating that over 30 billion US dollars in climate finance has been not accounted for. So
Wow.
there has not been proper accountability for the climate finance in the past. So there is a problem with transparency, and the way that everything is structured makes things also non-transparent for most communities in the global south. So there has to be a system change in how these solutions to tackle the current crisis that we have now, the way we have to tackle them has to be from the people. Like the people themselves have to bring the solutions. The people themselves have to be empowered in such a way that they can address the issues of climate change. They can adapt to the impacts of climate change. They can know how to adapt, and this will include so many things. It includes capacity building, development, and of which also development itself needs a lot of money. But at the same time, the climate finance has been coming also in form of lending, and this kind of lending already also increases the debt burden in our countries. So there's a lot of things that, like, how we have to address this has to be considered on a matter of justice, like a matter of looking at who is responsible. Yeah, a matter of saying that yes, we are responsible. We have to be accountable for this. And what matters is what happens before the conferences, what happens in the US, what happens in Europe, what happens in China, in all these countries that are actually emitting the most. So when there is a lot of change in these countries, before the conferences, then there's an impact at the conferences themselves. So there has to be people building up the pressure within the countries, social movements, every stakeholder. It does not, you don't have to be an activist. You just need to be responsible. You just need to think about your responsibility so that others can have a better life, so that others can have a life that you're living, because there are a lot of people who are suffering from your comfort. There are a lot of people who are dying from your comfort. So these are the things that a lot of people need to understand, because most of, also when you look at where like these companies are coming from that are extracting oil in our countries. For example, in Uganda, we have a certain project, an oil project by a French company itself. So you realize that the people in these countries, they don't know about these projects. They don't know what's happening in these countries. They don't know that they are extracting. There's an extractive neo-colonial way of taking our resources from these countries, and at the same time these countries face impacts of climate change. These countries face human rights violations. They suffer from oil spills at the comfort of the global north.
It makes me think there must be a role for education to play, for schools, universities, to make people aware of everything you're talking about before they actually go into the working world. Do you think there are changes that could be made in the education of young people? Are there things that people need to learn when they're young that could make a difference?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that people need to learn when they are young that could make a difference. And there's a lot of things I've learned also from my activism itself, because when I first became a climate activist, I was looking at it in form of like how climate change is affecting us, like what we see, like the droughts, what we see, like the flooding, the landslides. But when I actually looked at where I grew up from, how I grew up, like where I come from, because I come from a rural area. I come from Palisa, and I come from a tribe called the Iteso tribe. And I grew up from a peasant family. My dad was a farmer, and he's still a farmer until today. And how we used to face difficulties in terms of also accessing water for our livestock. We had to walk really long distances actually to access water. We had to really walk long distance to access grass for our livestock. And all these things were very impactful, like especially also on our economic side, because my dad was not able actually to raise enough income, because in our community we are livestock keepers, and we sell livestock to get money to take our children to school most of the times. And that's how my dad was trying to take us to school. But we found like there were cases where most of the livestock also were not really healthy enough, because they were not getting enough food, they were not accessing enough water. And this also forced my dad to sell off most of his livestock, also my grandfather. And my dad had to get chicken, and when he got chicken, he's away, like he started selling eggs. And this is how he was able to get some extra income. But there are so many families in my region who did not have any option. They had to sell off everything. They had to, and after they didn't have a hope like to also take their children to school, because they could not get any other way of earning money, because most of the people there have not, they are farmers. They have not gone to school. They cannot do any other work. So there is just like an indigenous sort of community. And so when I tried to connect this, how I grew up from, and also the area I grew up from, and also the people who had been impacted because of their dependence on livestock keeping and their dependence on agriculture, and how the changes in weather patterns affected them, not just in terms of like the weather. It affected them socially, it affected them economically, it affected them also in terms of also moving, because some people also had to migrate. So I think for me, when we go to school, when we have this sort of education to understand these things, then we can have an impact. And what I can say to most students is like, it's not just about you. Like, we have to learn that it's like we are living in this world not as one, but we are living this world with other people. We are living this world with other ethnic groups. We are living this world with different species that actually help us to survive, because everyone helps another to survive. This is how actually nature was made. This is how we were made on the planet. But how we are living is that we are living to oppress other species, to oppress other people, to oppress other ethnicities, so that we are always superior and we are always in control and not accounting. And this is what, like, these kinds of injustices are actually also one of the things that are causing the climate crisis. It's a major issue. It's also an inequality issue. It's also an issue of uh, racism. It's also an issue that connects to colonialism. So it's very interconnected.
Nicholas, do you feel overall, do you feel optimistic or pessimistic about the future, and why?
I think it's a little bit of both. For example, for me, when I look at, because I've been an activist for 3 years, and we have really done a lot, like as
Hmm.
climate activists, to like bring our voices onto international tables, to share our stories, to actually let people understand all these topics. But with all this hard work, with all this hard work from the climate movement, from different people also who are like working on different social issues, you see that there has been slow progress.
Yes.
Yeah, there has been slow progress. And most times also when we get a lot of achievement, we celebrate on them. But and in the end, you find that when the governments change, when different things happen in the geopolitics, a lot is reversed and a lot is affecting the
Yes.
small progress that we have made. For example, I would say that currently, right now, I am very pessimistic because, like, the current geopolitics itself. I know, like, with the U.S. elections, with what's happening in the EU, also in Germany itself.
Yeah.
There is a rise in climate denial. There is a rise in denying of accountability. There is a rise in far right. I would say a far right movement is rising, and this is a threat to a lot of things. This is what is actually also a big threat to also seeking justice. And for me, I would say that I feel like there is still hope, especially
Good.
for our countries, because we don't have a choice. That's the truth. We don't have a choice to decide what to fight for, or to decide what we want to fight against, or what we want to agree to, because we are already in an oppressed like system. We are mostly in oppressed systems, non-democratic, and for us, our only hope is to keep moving. Like, that's what we always do. We keep trying, we keep pushing, because there's always a time where we can have the radical change.
It seems to me that maybe the legal profession needs to be doing more. Climate lawyers. I interviewed a climate lawyer a few months ago, and she talked about how difficult it is to prove in a legal sense in front of a judge what damage has been caused, who's responsible for it, and how the victim should be compensated. And I have a feeling that the legal profession is advancing very slowly.
It's very true, but at the same time, the legal profession itself, it's highly important, but at the same time, like, the legal profession itself is favoring a lot corporations, big
Mm.
companies. Because I would give a case study of like the project in Uganda. There was a legal case filed against this project in France under the law called the Duty of Vigilance Law.
Yes.
And this law is mainly like addressing the supply chains, like being fair. We filed a case to demand that this project is stopped in the first
Yes.
place. And we addressed a lot of issues. We brought how people had lost their land, how people had been unfairly compensated,
Hmm.
how also this project itself is in the middle of reserved areas, including a national park and close to a lake shore, which also has denied so many communities access to fishing. So we also try to address the loss of livelihood of the people itself. And you know what happened is that the company itself had more lawyers than us. So it's also a matter of having the capacity itself, because we are coming from countries that are not rich. Like we
Yes.
don't have enough money. We cannot pay for many lawyers. We cannot. We have the evidence. We have everything. We can, because in this case, this case took almost 3 years. It was a case to stop the East African crude oil pipeline, which is a pipeline in Uganda. Under this case, we were basing on the due diligence plan of Total Energies, whether it had addressed these issues of human rights, whether it addressed issues of land grabbing before the project started. And what happened is that they kept changing their plans, and they were not sharing this information transparently to the communities. And some of the strategies they used is sharing like misinformation on TV, that they're sustainable, that people's lives are getting better. But in the end, we were proving also this wrong, because there was also a case where they showed an advert of someone having a beehive business, or a bee making business, and they were saying that this person was coming from this area. And when communities and activists themselves went and observed, these hives had no bees, and this person was not even from this area. We are fighting against corporations that are rich. They can openly lie to everyone. They can openly show nice adverts that they are sustainable, that they are doing this transition. But what's really happening is that they have a lot of money. They can buy all the lawyers. And if we get more support from the people themselves, because the money that these companies get are coming, this money is coming from the people. The money that is invested in this oil project is from the people themselves. So the people have a choice. They can say no. They can decide to fight for fair policies. They can decide to even finance good lawyers, enough lawyers to support such communities. And the issue is that I think that the issue is also understanding that it's a matter of justice. Most of the times you realize that people might not prioritize something because they don't understand it really critically.
Right.
So if
Right.
people can understand something really critically, if people can understand the importance of like of accountability, the importance of also putting into focus on which product am I consuming? How is it being consumed? Are the supply chains fair? Is this product going to affect the climate? And is this product going to affect my future? This is how people have to live.
How can you deal with that, Nicholas? What can be done? What should people be doing to change this? I mean, I know you're out and you're speaking and you're talking about it. What are you and your activist friends able to do to achieve?
For us, we are just like trying to make impact on a grassroots level. So this is something that we are trying to do, because we know that it's very hard to have like this change very fast, because we have a lot of things that limit us, the geopolitics. We also have an issue where we are not heard, like our voices are not being amplified to the right community. We are in such a system where, of course, it's important for us to have like grassroots activities, and this is how we are doing. We try to organize and bring solutions to our communities themselves. Like we go there and we tell them about climate change, we educate them about their rights, we try to tell them about they can also say no to big companies when they come in. And we also try to educate them about the importance of protecting the environment. Of course, they already know it. They already have this in the different tribalistic customs. It's already there, but we try to improve it and try
Mm-hmm.
to connect it with the culture, because there are many cultures in Uganda. We have about 54 tribes, and in Africa itself, there are so many different tribes. So we have different groups of people that like are working with different communities at grassroots level to support them, to help them to build capacity, to bring solutions. With there are some activists who are installing solar panels on people's houses, like communities that don't have access to electricity. These are the
Mm-hmm.
rural communities, so they are installing solar panels. the people who are working on energy projects, like to bring sustainable energy in communities. So we are trying to do grassroots activities. We know that we need a lot to work within our communities, and this is what we are trying to do. And at the same time, we are trying to also work along with international grassroots groups to bring a connection to our fights, because we need to work on this together. We need to unite. We need to unite different struggles, whether it's the struggles for climate justice, whether it's the struggles for racial justice, whether the struggle for social justice. All these struggles are very connected. And this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to make it connected and bring a big movement that can fight against the people in power, the people who are rich, to actually tell them that we are enough is enough. We are fed up.
Do you feel that you've made some progress in this area? Are there some movements or things that happened that you're proud of?
Yeah. For example, we have been fighting the pipeline project for a long time because it was meant to start around 2017 or 2018. But we built like a strong alliance against this pipeline, this oil pipeline, and we addressed the issues of the people, and we also exposed the banks that were involved. So many banks in Europe, so many banks in the US, so many insurance companies. And of course, when we did this mobilization, when we did this global activism, where we had also movements in France, movements in the UK joining, we saw so many insurance companies stepping out. We had over 20 insurance companies stepping out of this whole project. We had over 20 banks stepping out of this project.
Good. That's a very big deal.
Yeah, and currently, of course, the project itself, like they already started drilling the oil, but the project itself is still struggling with funding. So this is something that a global movement can do, and we are also at the same time at a threat, like because we are seeing that the oppression is increasing on also climate movements. It's not just in Uganda, but also in the UK. We are seeing that they are making long sentences for activists. They are putting so many charges. They are terming activists as criminals. So something like this, of which this is not true. Like this is something that they're trying to bring out. I would say that we have achieved this, and I am very proud to be part of the movement itself. To also like demand for different perspectives of justice, because I've not just participated on this campaign, but also campaigns for debt justice, for debt cancellation, campaigns on human rights, campaigns on also like issues connecting to migration and climate. So it's like I think it has made me like feel like I am not alone, and of course I am not alone. Um, and I think that we can unite as one. We have like the potential, because we are facing this crisis. We are facing different crises, and they are very connected. And we even though we are coming from different ethnicities, we are coming from different races. I've seen that in the movement itself, there are people who are coming from different countries, different tribes, different indigenous communities coming together, and the stories are always the same. Whether it's someone from Latin America, whether it's someone from Asia, whether it's someone from an island state, it's always the same story. It's always the story of the cries of oppression, the cries of big companies exploiting, the cries of also effects of climate change and affecting different perspectives of people's lives, also affecting the ecosystem, affecting the biodiversity. And so, with all these stories, there's a lot of unity, I would say, but our power is being limited in different ways. Also, it's limited in terms of traveling, because we cannot easily travel to another country. For example, it's not easy for me to come to the US itself because of a visa. Like it's very difficult to get a US visa. I personally have been denied visas twice to go to to come into Europe, and the reasons are very invalid. most of the time it's just like they just don't want you to come and share your story. So we are limited by different things, and it's important for many communities to understand how important it is for our voices to be heard, how important it is for us to bring the reality to them, because most of the countries, they are not really facing these impacts at first hand. So we need people to talk about this, people coming from our countries.
What are your plans for the next year? Do you have a movement in mind, an initiative in mind, the way you see what you're going to do in the near future?
Yeah, I think for me, next year I'm planning, of course, to kind of change the way I've been doing my activism, to see how I can organize more, like help in organizing more, to actually make people like in the movement itself understand, especially people from Europe, how important it is for our voices to be at an international scale. So I want to make people understand that to feel what we feel, for example, because most times people are not willing to support if they're not understanding. So for me, I want to do more to make people understand, and at the same time to also grow a movement in Uganda itself, because now there are so many movements also in Uganda, but I want more movements to be there also in Uganda to support communities. And I specifically, I am a co-organizer and also a co-lead at End Fossil Occupy. It's a local grassroots movement in Uganda, and we are also planning to do campaigns like on energy access to actually bring solutions to communities, because
Mm,
our communities also want to see the solutions. They don't want us to just say that we don't want this big oil company to drill oil in our country, but they also want to see the solutions that we bring onto the
good.
table.
So you want
So
to bring solutions to people so they can see that they have options.
yeah, yeah, something like this, like to see that they have options, because we are talking about the just transition itself. We are talking about phasing out fossil fuels, but in the end, you realize that in our countries we don't have the solar panels, for example, but we receive sunshine throughout the year. We can like the estimate of Africa itself to generate electricity from solar is about 40%. So it's almost half of the world's solar energy that can be generated from Africa itself. But at the same time, the solar panels are not in Africa because there is no finance being channeled to Africa, or there is no finance being channeled to address this potential, which of course has to be addressed, which has to come from the obligations and the agreements that were signed, but this is not
Right.
happening. So we want to do this on a grassroots level to show that there is potential in us, and there's also potential for us to say no against projects that we don't feel comfortable with, or against projects that are going to displace us from our land. So this is something that I am planning, and also I want to plan that next year I also be part of like a group of activists to support uh, other climate activists, not just me, but other climate activists to attend international global events to share their stories, because it's not just my story, but there are other people who have more stories to tell. There are other people who have faced worse impacts. There are other people who have faced worst issues. Like there are many friends of mine who come from the DRC, and they also link the conflict in the DRC to the minerals that are there. And they tell me stories, very bad stories of people always migrating. Right now, there are over 5 million people in displacement camps because of these rebel conflicts. And these conflicts are not funded by the DRC. These conflicts are funded by Europe, they are funded by the US, by China. So you find that there's a lot of competition when there are minerals itself, and at the same time, a lot of people are being impacted. They are being displaced, and on top of that, these countries are not trying to account for all these issues. And I don't know if you know this, but there has been a case filed against Apple in like the DRC itself has filed a case
I
against
didn't know that.
Apple.
No.
Yeah,
What was it about?
it's about, of course, the unfair extraction of coltan, which of course is being used to make the smartphones. It's not just like all the smartphones that like the whole almost the whole world is holding is coming because of like these resources like coltan, and that is in the DRC. So because of the conflicts that are coming in because of these minerals and the robber groups that are coming in, they are extracting these minerals unfairly, and they are extracting these minerals without fair supply chains. So the DRC itself has filed a case against Apple, so in Europe. So you see that there's a lot of things that activists can do. So these are the
Yes.
things that activists have been talking about, not just this year but also last year. This is not a new case. There's child labor being used in these cobalt mines and coltan mines. There's also an LNG project in Mozambique that has also brought about a conflict in Cabo Delgado. I don't know if you know about this, but this LNG project is being owned by two big oil companies, and all these big oil companies are coming from Europe, and the banks that are funding this are also coming from Europe and the US. And you find that conflicts are there and people are being displaced. So there's a lot of things happening corporations because of extraction, a lot of unfairness in the supply chains.
You have a lot of different areas that you can be active in. Is there any, like, one last thing you'd like to say? Any one last message?
My main message also goes to so many young people that they have a lot of potential. That's what I can say. Like, because right now we are being governed, of course, by a different system, but we, the young people, we can make our own system
Right.
when we get into these positions. So if you're hearing this message wherever you are, just know that you can make an impact to change so many people's lives in the world. Because there's always a saying that goes that it's not your fault that the world like is like this, but it's your fault if you leave the world the way it is. So it's always your fault when you leave the world in this state where others have to die for your comfort. So it's something that you have to act upon to have a fair, inclusive, equitable world for everyone. And this is my main message, especially to young people and to also older people who are happy to listen, happy to think about like a progressive change. This is also the same message that you can do something. You don't have to be an activist. You don't have to be a lawyer, but you can do something within your means to make others' lives better, because every action makes a difference.
That's a great message, Nicholas. I want to thank you for everything that you shared. Thank you very much for your time and your passion, and thank you for everything that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you too. Thank you so much.